Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where, as we've noted before, we talk a lot about Disney on this show in particular, because they just churn out news story after news story. But you know who else we're talking about a lot these days? Netflix, and perhaps another Hollywood juggernaut is emerging. And I think Disney is aware of this, which is why they're directly challenging them with that Disney streaming service, which we're going to talk about today. And as these two behemoths rise in Hollywood, can there only be one? And should we let them fight? I can't wait. I actually think it's fascinating. And I'm not quite sure who would come out on top. They both have really deep pockets to fund said war. So anyway, let's start off with Netflix, which, you know, Disney's not a risk taker, right? Whereas Netflix is all about risk, which is what really separates the two. Although Disney is just so full of win. And Netflix falls on its face an awful lot. They haven't taken anyone down with them just quite yet, though. But I think that as they take bigger and bigger risks, it becomes more of the risk starts to spill over to who they're taking a risk on. And this is the biggest risk, but yet with the potential biggest payoff I've ever seen. And that's the Obamas, it's rumored, are in talks to make content and appear in said content for Netflix. This rumor originated out of the New York Times. Of course, no one will comment on it, but it's a really big freaking deal. It's a game changer itself. Now, the rumor says that they will produce content that will focus on some of the things that were important to the Obamas when they were in office. You know, a lot of the political things that Obama championed, and then as for Michelle Obama, you know, nutrition and things like that. And they would have discussions. This is the idea that was floated out there in the rumor, that they would both host film discussions about said topics, like town halls, or like a documentary where they interview experts, or maybe a combination of the two, et cetera, et cetera. So as I said, this is super tricky. Now, make no mistake, I think they should definitely do it. First off, they're going to make so much freaking money off of this because Netflix is just going to throw money at the deal to do this, that they should take it. There's some amounts of money you just can't say no to, and I believe that's Netflix money. Also, it gives them the potential to reach Oprah level status. You know, you would think, what more can you achieve besides being the first Black president and first lady of the United States of America? Oprah level, you know, to be that much of a cultural phenomenon. I think it would and I can understand some fear of the legacy being damaged because of the Trump win afterwards. So this would, I think, also, if they have any concern about that, I don't know if they need to, but if they had even the slightest concern, that would shut that down if this works out really well. Also, as we all know, at least one of their children, Malia, is interested in working in Hollywood, and, you know, to have this connection would certainly be helpful to her. I wouldn't be surprised if she ended up working on the shows. But this is going to be very tricky to navigate. It's unusual for presidents after their terms to stay high profile. Yet the Obamas do seem very much in their prime and are in intense demand. However, the reason that past presidents have kept a low profile is out of respect for the current president and not to compete with them, to let them do their job. However, talk about game changers, you have a current president who's not exactly respectful for those who came before him. And so he changed the game, not only in that respect, but also in that he's a media president. So I can see the Obamas being like, well, why not if this is the new world that we live in? Now, if they say yes, tone is what's going to be particularly difficult here. And I think that they should not host the specials. I don't think they should appear in them to that degree. I think they should produce, and I would do fiction. I would do movies. I would do TV shows. But I would just introduce them like Walt Disney used to do. And the Obamas can either do it together, separately, maybe a mix of both. And Walt Disney introduced every single special on Sunday night on ABC, to actually, interestingly enough, just as a side note, to get money to make the theme parks. That's why he agreed to do that. But it put them in everyone's living room or in their life on a weekly basis. And I think that would be perfect for the Obamas. It would give them that exposure, that iconic imagery beyond the presidency, but it wouldn't make it seem like maybe they were grabbing for too much. I think that would be a really nice balance. And then through the shows and movies and still documentaries, et cetera, that they produce, they could focus on diverse talent. And I think that would be wonderful in the wake of like Get Out and Black Panther, et cetera, for them to contribute to that movement. I think it would be hard to criticize. The name of the game here is to not only do good work, but to, think of the criticism that might come down down the pipeline in advance and headed off. And I think that, and on that note, since they're going to be making so much money, and I believe they're doing this with some of their book money, which has also been substantial, give heavily to charity. And they have their own foundation, of course. So if you're like, I'm helping diverse talent, I'm giving a lot of money away to charity, I think it would be we're not too heavily involved, on screen. I think that would be very difficult to fault them, even if you weren't in favor of it. And I imagine a number of people would be. But this has fascinating potential, again, not just for the entertainment industry, but for presidents. And it would also, I think, change who would want to be a president in the future if this is the kind of doors that it opens after the presidency. I mean, to catapult you into the entertainment arena, it would make, I think, you're starting to see a lot more people be interested in being the president, like Bob Iger, The Rock, but I think this would make that even more the case. And then that's a double-edged sword itself. That's a political discussion. But I'm curious, do you think the Obamas should take this deal? Do you think it's good for Netflix? And would you watch? And what would you advise them to do if they do take the deal? All right, so that's the first story of the day. Really good stuff. Now, as for the Disney streaming service, again, that direct challenge to Netflix, it just became more real yesterday with an actual talent hire. It's not a huge talent hire. Well, the name is huge, Jon Favreau, but actually it's not that big a deal for the series itself. So it was announced that Jon Favreau will exec produce and write a Star Wars series for the Disney streaming service. They said they're going to do more than one, I believe, so this is just going to be one of those. But I think it's very important to realize that they did not say he would be the showrunner. He is going to, again, exec produce the show and write it, which probably means contribute to the outline, oversee the writer's room, etc. And also they didn't even talk about what the premise is. So it was kind of like a non-story to some degree. Although people kind of turned it into a representation story, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But the showrunner, that's the key to any television series, as we've discussed before. It's usually someone who's a writer, and that's the person who has the responsibility of how the show turns out, and also is in control of how the show turns out. And Jon Favreau, by the way, cannot be the showrunner. It's a full-time job to be the showrunner on a television series. And Disney has other things that they want him to do. It's interesting what a company man he has become yet again. He, of course, kickstarted the entire MCU with the first Iron Man, and he did Iron Man 2, a movie I really enjoyed. But a lot of people had problems with it, so Robert Downey Jr. got nervous and said, let's hire Shane Black instead to direct and handle the writing duties on the third Iron Man film, which didn't turn out so great either for a number of people. But anyway, Jon Favreau, that was a little bit tough for him. His career took a bit of a hit, but he recovered brilliantly with The Jungle Book, also for Disney, and now, of course, he's doing The Lion King in the same vein, set to hit theaters in 2019. So he's very busy. He's also apparently voicing a multi-armed alien character in the Solo movie. So yeah, he's very much in the Disney camp again these days. Now, I think he's a solid choice. Again, he's just going to oversee it, give it his stamp of approval, and he's a big name for Lucasfilm and Disney to throw in front of audiences. They're like, you love Jon Favreau, right? So watch the Star Wars series. Again, it's kind of like damage control in advance. And hopefully, it'll allow them to take a bigger risk with the showrunner. If they have Jon Favreau as a safe choice to balance it out. That's my hope. That's going to be the more interesting hire. And also how the show looks. Is it going to look like Game of Thrones and look really great, like almost like a movie? Or is it going to look like something like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Sorry, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fans. And also Star Trek Discovery. Shows that, I'm not saying anything about the quality of the show, but that seem very much like they're made for television. And I think that would be hurtful to Star Wars. People are already complaining about oversaturation for the brand. Now, again, everybody said yesterday, oh, great, another straight, and they were being sarcastic, another straight white man being hired to work on a Star Wars property. I mean, look, at this point, clearly that's who Kathleen Kennedy gets along with best. And that's her background. Spielberg, Lucas, those are her dudes, those are her bros. But again, the showrunner spot, that's where she really has a chance to shine. And hopefully she heard all that criticism yesterday. And I do agree that it was not great to make the announcement on International Women's Day. They should have been a little smarter than that. But hopefully she heard it and she's like, okay, I better knock it out of the park with this showrunner hire. Also, who's the lead? What's it about? I mean, that's another even more preferable spot for diversity, although I do not think it should be another brunette white woman. I don't think it should be a white woman at all. They have enough of those in Star Wars. Kathleen Kennedy went into overdrive in that area. She did some nice work, although I think, again, she's in danger of undoing it because, I think Emilia Clarke might be a step too far. That might be the Caucasian brunette who breaks the camel's back. But I would love to see some kind of diversity and not only the showrunner, but again, who the show is about. Now, speaking of straight white guys getting work, Netflix, back to Netflix, has hired another one who not only is a straight white guy from comics like Mark Millar, but seems a lot like Mark Millar in so many ways that if I were Mark Millar, I'd be like, what the hell? I mean, how can Mark Millar and Rob Liefeld, who's the hire, how can they coexist in Netflix without, making each other's deals less special? I mean, that's particularly bad for Mark Millar. Rob Liefeld's in there second, so he's just happy to be in there, or I think Mark Millar's like, what the hell? So what's Rob Liefeld going to do? Now, of course, he's coming off of Deadpool fame. He's done a very good job of using that to propel his own career. Although, on a side note, did you see the rumor that the Deadpool had a screening and it did Deadpool 2 and it did not go well? That's a fascinating development. Tim Miller is about to have a very good weekend. He's like, I'm going to have a smile on my face all day, all 3 days. So anyway, I'm counting today because that's when the news broke. So anyway, Rob Liefeld, Netflix has hired him to create a shared universe of movies for Netflix based on his post-Marvel creation called quote-unquote Extreme Universe. That's so Rob Liefeld. But really, anyone heard of that? Anyone a fan of Extreme Universe? I don't really know what the brand is that they're building on there. And they have a lot of like super Rob Liefeld kind of names for the characters, right? It seems crazy to me. And what's even crazier is who shall oversee the writer's room and produce these shows, these movies? Akiva Goldsman. That man continues to get work. I can't believe it. I mean, how did he get in here? Well, it turns out he's been part of trying to shop Extreme Universe around Hollywood for quite some time. He got to Rob Liefeld, he packaged this deal, and he made himself an indispensable part of it. I'm sure Rob Liefeld's like, I don't care. I now work at Netflix. Me and Mark Millar are the same. And Mark Millar's like, okay. So anyway, I also think this is interesting because I've talked about Netflix turning into a comic book store in my reviews for their content as of late. And it seems to be more and more the case. Like that's actually their goal. And I think I don't know if I would advise that. I think that's a niche market, even though we're a very loud market, right? And also I think they aren't having enough of a balance on the site. They could end up turning away other types of viewers. They should have more shows also like The Crown. And they do. House of Cards is coming back for a final season. But I feel like they're doing so much comic book stuff that it's going to drown all that other stuff out. And Netflix will just seem like a visual comic book store. And while that sounds pretty good on the surface of it, I think that they're like turning into a middle bottom of the stack comic book store, right? I mean, I think every comic book reader knows what I'm talking about. There are weeks where things are slow and you buy comics and you're like, I shouldn't have bought that comic, but I really wanted to read some comics this week. And I think that Netflix is turning into the same experience where you're like, I shouldn't have watched that, but I wanted to watch something. So I know I feel kind of bad about it. And I think that they're going to oversaturate their own market. And I think that's particularly a problem as quality as I just said, begins to dip in their content. So I'm a little nervous about this, and I think they should tread carefully. I don't know if I would have done this hire, especially before Mark Millar even puts anything out there. I mean, like, what if these both bomb? That would just be so bad. All right, so anyway, but they have the Obamas. And you know what? The Obamas are such a big get. If that what goes through, who the heck cares what happens with all the other stuff? That would be history making. Not just in entertainment, but in politics and in the country. And in the globe. It's amazing. All right, so the viewer question, speaking of history, I think this is a great question. It comes from George Kaltsudis. And George not only has a great question, but paints such a wonderful picture. So George says, hi, Grace. I love your show. I've been working as an art director in film marketing for almost all the major studios for 10 years now. That's so cool. And I often enjoy putting on my headphones and listening to your episodes while I work. As I said, what a great picture, George. I'm so happy to be a part of your creative experience. Now, his question is, given the enormous success of Marvel's Black Panther, do you think that Warner Brothers should greenlight, get it, greenlight? I do, George, I do get it, well played. And get it on the fast track with the Jon Stewart Green Lantern film? And if so, who would you want to see direct it? I think it's a little too early to talk about who should direct it. There have been some rumors that Chris McQuarrie might be doing it because Tom Cruise would play Hal Jordan. I have mixed feelings about that. That rumor is too flimsy to really talk about. But I do think, they have this idea of doing like a Lethal Weapon kind of Hal Jordan, Jon Stewart team up. I think that could be interesting. I think doing multiple Green Lanterns is a great idea. So I don't think you're going to see a solo Jon Stewart movie. And I think that, you want to focus on the Green Lantern Corps. You want to do something that's very different from the first Green Lantern movie. So I think I like the idea of multiple Green Lanterns. But I do agree that one of those lanterns, who should be front and center, one of the main characters, should be Jon Stewart. And I think the takeaway from Black Panther should be how they depict Jon Stewart. And that is to make him a real character and not a token like Finn, for instance, in the Star Wars movies. Even like early Will Smith. That was I love Will Smith. I think he's great. But the black character who makes a lot of jokes, who's bigger than life. That worked very well. It's beloved by audiences of all kinds. But I think that let's continue to evolve, and that's having very dimensional, dynamic characters. And Jon Stewart is certainly one of those. He has a really great military background. He's an architect, and I think one of the most interesting things about lanterns is that their constructs that they make with the lantern energy kind of represents who they are, the choice, because they can make anything they want. And so it often, I love that there's a military and architectural theme to Jon Stewart's, whereas Kyle Rayner. I forgot the name of that stupid Green Lantern, but he's an artist, so everything he does has like a cartoonish, artistic feel to it, right? Hal Jordan's a pilot, right? Who's like old school. So I think that's really great, and they should play up, and in particular with Jon Stewart. Also, by the way, he has some great romances just from the Justice League animated series alone. Hawkgirl, fabulous. And then also, even with Vixen, he made a great couple. So I think, they could bring Vixen into the DCEU by way of Jon Stewart, potentially, and that could be great. So that's what I think, that should be the best takeaway from Black Panther, how characters of color are depicted, and to move past the broader, more stereotypical depictions and create characters that feel as authentic as those in Black Panther did. So great question, George. I wonder what you're working on today, if you can tell us. Everybody, please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories, George's viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered on Monday, and of course, any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.